Welcome, everyone, to our CPN CMMC weekly roundtable. Skipped last week. I was out of town visiting some national parks. Now we're back in action. Today we have Jim Novakoff. He is the Senior Solution Architect at Salesforce. He's going to give us some insight into what's going on at Salesforce in regards to supporting their public sector clients for CMMC. Before we dive into that, happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. I have to mention that. You're wearing some green, I'm not, so but get to it after this. But welcome, Jim. How are you?
I am fine. How is everybody else doing?
Really good. I'm excited to, appreciate you reaching out to me and letting me know that Salesforce, you all are in the game as well. When we think of like CMMC solutions, Salesforce doesn't come top of mind, but yeah, that's why you're here to educate us. So we can jump right into it. Yeah, if you have some slides, you can go to at the top of the page. You see like an arrow that should say like share content.
Oh, okay, perfect.
You should have the ability to share. Talk us through your presentation. Once you click on that, do you see that arrow at the top?
Yep.
Okay.
I just gotta get the right window. Where is that? It's right here somewhere.
No worries. I forgot. And then if you're having trouble, you can send me your presentation. I can share it.
That's all right.
That's a better option.
I'll move this. I got two screens here, so let me just move this over to here. Do that. I can do that. You should see the screen, maybe.
Let's see. So once you hit the share and clicked on the screen, I'm not seeing it yet. Is it showing that you're?
Yeah, in there.
Not seeing anything yet. So I'll tell you what you can do.
That's all right. I can just talk through it. I can share this with folks afterwards.
Okay, sure. Let's do that.
Yeah. So as I said, I'm Jim Novakoff. Guys could just reach out to me later on if you want. It's all good. Salesforce is in the game too. We have a platform similar to AWS. In fact, our platform runs on AWS, and it'll be running on Google. Our CMMC apps run on GovCloud, AWS GovCloud, Google GovCloud. Our platform for GovCloud is FedRAMP High, and we recommend to all of our customers that they do not use Salesforce for commercial for CMMC. So the reason why people are looking towards Salesforce for CMMC is because it is a customer relationship management system. So the system may include FCI and CUI having to do with procurements. It may also have customer service case information regarding to errors or help that they need that might include IP addresses and other information that kind of falls within the rubric of CUI, even when it's not necessarily labeled like that. So, and SPD, protection data. So folks that are using Salesforce and they are already engaging both within the defense industrial base as a subcontractor. We have prime contractors that are also using Salesforce. So for them to continue, they need to put a version of Salesforce within their boundary, also called an enclave. I hate the word enclave, but I'd rather use the word boundary. So they put it in their boundary, get it assessed along with the other applications that they're using. And then they can continue to do business with the US government on secure programs using their Salesforce as their customer relationship management system. So the slides kind of address what the scope is. The Salesforce platform, like AWS, it does a lot of stuff from AI to sales, create sales opportunities, put customer contact information in there, including addresses. It describes what the customers are doing with Salesforce. That's called opportunities in Salesforce. So it's really pretty simple to link mission areas to agencies and procurements within Salesforce. So if they want to continue to do business with the government, they need to upgrade their orgs to CMMC compliance. I was just mentioning to Derek a few minutes ago, we are beginning to see some interest in that. I can mention there's only a few people here. So CrowdStrike, Salesforce itself, other folks have already got or in the process of getting an assessment done for their CMMC org. So we're beginning to see some uplift activity for security of the Salesforce orgs, but we're not seeing a whole lot of it yet. It's beginning to trickle in. The good news, however, is that I can answer questions as we go along here. Yeah, so you can do it two ways. You can either create a brand new org for CMMC and then put it in an enclave, or you can upgrade your whole org to CMMC. From a Salesforce perspective, right, the effort is about the same. And there's not a lot of effort in moving it through. If you have a lot of customizations, however, and our clients have been lax with protecting integrations, they're lax with protecting data flows, that makes upgrading to CMMC a whole lot more difficult. But upgrading to the org itself is not, as long as there are no hard-coded references. But we have accelerators that we use to deal with that, Linda. So it's relatively easy. It's also relatively easy to align our CMMC orgs to CMMC. Because we're on AWS cloud, because it's FedRAMP moderate, we get a lot of inheritance from FedRAMP already. And because of the way Salesforce is built, there are a lot of out-of-the-box tools, third-party products that make compliance with CMMC mostly an out-of-the-box experience. There are some cases where that's a little bit more difficult, for example, log aggregation. If we have multiple applications inside the boundary, Salesforce doesn't necessarily help with log aggregation. It doesn't necessarily help with a few other things, endpoint protection. But other than stuff like that, the majority of Salesforce compliance can all be done with configuration settings within the Salesforce org itself. So of the 110 CMMC controls for L2, 43 of them are fully inherited. So that kind of gets your scope down pretty quickly right from the get-go. Of the 43, a lot of them can be met by policy. So we can't obviously inherit the training controls from somebody else, right? We have to train our own people, but that's a policy control. By the time you get done with the policy controls, you're down to just a handful of technical controls. So there's things to do in AC, SC, CM, in those families, there are things that you need to do. But from a technical perspective, like set minimum password lengths and timeouts and all, prevents bug tunneling and all that kind of stuff. So there's things that you need to do technically. But those technical controls that are not out of the box, there's just a handful of them, 4 or 5. So by the time you get done with your inheritance, and the time you get done with your policies, and then the time you get done with your out-of-the-box configurations, you're able to address the overwhelming number of controls with Salesforce without too much technical lift. Now, what we're seeing with some customers is that they may not be satisfied with that. There are customers kind of overshooting the mark, for example, in creating PDIs and other stuff that they may or may not need to do. We don't discourage that. But if you want to do things that are in addition to CMMC along the way, knock yourselves on out. But if you just want to pass your assessment, the majority of the controls can be done with out-of-the-box configurations. And we have solution handbooks. We have baseline configuration handbooks. We've got the whole list of user stories. If you're into Jira or you're doing that type of project management, we have lists of user stories that you can import. So we make it really, really simple to do it, relatively. Right? CMMC is not a walk in the park under any circumstance. And, you gotta be ready for the third-party assessment and meeting all your objectives and your test criteria and all like that. But nonetheless, the technical lift is a whole lot less than a lot of people would think. And as a result, it's a whole lot less scary. So that's kind of the overall perspective. So as long as you kind of know CMMC and you know Salesforce, or you get your hands on our CRM, customer responsibility matrix, and our handbooks and our accelerators, it's a relatively easy thing to do, especially if you're a smaller company that doesn't have a lot of complexity in their existing orgs or a lot of complexity in their ecosystem. So that's kind of the high level presentation. Again, since there are just such a few of us, if folks have questions or want to discuss some areas of control or how we address something, I'm certainly more than happy just to spill the beans.
Yeah, definitely. So I have a couple questions, and anyone else have questions? Certainly. Oh, Linda, I'm gonna let you go first. You raise your hand.
So, and I'm just going to talk about a case that we have that I'm coming across and I'm trying to advise on. Enterprise commercial version. I think that they're trying to prevent having to include Salesforce in the boundary by allowing CUI in the actual system. So CUI is never going to be stored in there. But are we still able to provide or have access to the baseline configurations to implement security controls, even though we're not planning to meet CMMC or be in CMMC boundary because we're keeping CUI out, but maybe there's some configuration settings that we should probably still implement as like a security best practice? So are those configuration guides available on the commercial side as well?
Yeah, I can share those with you, Linda. Just reach out to me separately and I'll share it with you.
Okay. Thanks.
But without going to GovCloud, there are just some things you're not going to be able to do. And then if you're not using Security Center, which is an add-on product, there are some things you're not going to be able to do. So for example, the CM control that requires monitoring of the baseline, that you may, unless you want to purchase the additional licensing for that or purchase Shield so you can encrypt more stuff at rest, manage your own keys, that kind of stuff. There might not be things there are things that you won't be able to do in the commercial org, but nonetheless, the majority of it you can do.
Yeah, I think for now they're trying to just keep CUI out of the system altogether to avoid having it be in scope. CUI and FCI. But
so
I think some of those controls should still be implemented if they're available.
So they can transfer some of their existing licenses over to GovCloud and set up a separate GovCloud Salesforce CRM without a lot of additional expense. So when they're ready to put CUI in there, it's not a terribly hard lift, like I said. But the problem you've got is that some of the controls that we would use for CMMC may not be what commercial is doing. Yeah, so for example, Linda, a lot of commercial, and it being Salesforce, has kind of an open sharing model that everybody can kind of look at every account. And most commercial firms do that. And a lot of commercial firms allow everybody to look at all the opportunities, which are the mission areas that are going into those accounts, because they might want to use those accounts as references for other commercial accounts. So if you have one oil company that's doing, I don't know, some sort of regulatory work in Salesforce, they don't have a problem sharing that. But least privilege, and it kind of prevents that from happening in CMMC, right? So if you're looking at the CIA account and you don't have CIA within your sales territory and your personal sales territory, that's not something that we're generally going to allow. So if we were to do that in commercial, there might be some negative benefit to that. Yes, there are things that you can do in commercial to kind of harden the org. And those are good things. And people do that anyway, even without CMMC. But we shouldn't set the expectation that that commercial work will at any point be able to meet CMMC.
Okay. Yep, I'm following.
Yes. So if you've got my email, I'll help you out.
Share the email.
That's okay.
All right. Anyone else have other questions before I dive into my list of questions? Well, think of those questions. So Jim, first thing comes to mind for me is, so with the Salesforce CMMC solution, is this an alternative to like a Microsoft GCC High or Prevail, or is this kind of like an addition? Who's the target customer use case for this solution that Salesforce offers?
So it would be the Microsoft solution, Microsoft Dynamics, right? So they have a CRM solution that they can track their ongoing business and service tickets. ServiceNow is another competitor. So you can use Salesforce for email and stuff like that, but normally what smaller companies will do is they'll use GovCloud, FedRAMP Moderate, Google Workspace for their email solution and their file solution and stuff like that, and Salesforce is their customer management solution. For smaller companies, that's kind of the happy meal. If you throw Okta in there and CrowdStrike, those 4 applications alone are pretty much the CMMC happy meal for Salesforce. You don't need a whole lot more of that than that if you're a small company. If you're a bigger company, obviously you might want more. Most companies could do most of their work with either GCC High or the Google Workspace equivalent, Okta FedRAMP Moderate, and CrowdStrike Falcon Moderate. I mean, that'll take care of the majority of the controls in their entire ecosystem, not to mention just the Salesforce CRM part of it.
All right. Got it. Makes sense. And then as far as the resources you mentioned, like the solution handbook, the user stories, do you have to be a Salesforce customer, or is those something that are kind of like freely available or that you share?
Well, you have to be a Salesforce customer to get the CRM. So, the books don't do it. But for the people that are on here, as long as you don't use it for business purposes, use it for your own purposes, I'll go ahead and shoot you off a copy. We don't want to be liable, right? If you sharing that with your customers. But for your own background information, I would have no problem sharing with the five of you who are on here, since you were so good to join.
Okay.
And the other folks miss out.
That's fair enough.
Oops.
You don't show up, you don't get the goodies.
You don't show up to the convention, you don't get the swag.
Now, we know that the CMMC Level 2 certification assessments are underway since January. To your knowledge, have you all had any customers that went through using your CMMC CRM solution that has gone through an assessment yet?
It's gone through FedRAMP High as well as IL5. We have not seen people go through with Salesforce yet, but we're not terribly worried about it.
Okay. And the FedRAMP High, that's inherited from AWS Gov?
Yeah.
Okay.
Plus our own folks have a PATO. So we're using AWS's PATO as well as our own Salesforce GovCloud PATO. And, that puts us in pretty good.
So when, let's say, prospective clients or current customers who are on the commercial side, if they're comparing Salesforce CMMC solution versus, let's say, Microsoft Dynamics, what will be the value proposition for going with Salesforce?
We're better. I mean, if you look at Gartner, we're just better.
Okay.
To be fair, we're more expensive too. So if you're a Microsoft shop, a lot of, we know that Microsoft gives Dynamics of it for free. You can take that for what it's worth.
So with Microsoft Dynamics, if a client is using or putting CUI in that CRM solution, they would have to be in the GCC High.
Yeah, their entire ecosystem would be in GCC High, or their enclave would be GCC High.
Understood.
We would prefer everybody bite the bullet and just protect their own intellectual property by making their whole ecosystem CMMC, but we realize that that's just not always viable for everybody. But we share our opinion on that. We don't think that there's a lot of utility in creating an enclave stovepipe, but that's just not always possible. So we're realistic about it. But
okay.
There's no reason why entire companies, even for commercial, could not be on our government org.
Understood. All right.
Except that our features are 6 months behind, right? Like any GCC org, it takes a while for us to go through the FedRAMP significant change process. So we tend to be about, some things require significant changes and sometimes they don't, right? So if it's not a significant change, we release it right away on our GovCloud. But if it requires a significant change, then we gotta let the clock run out. So a lot of our artificial intelligence right now is going through this change process. So our artificial intelligence is not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't mind that sort of thing, there's no reason why, entire companies could.
Sounds good. All right. Anyone else have questions? I want to maximize our time with Jim. Your questions, I know. This is all new information for me. I know much about what Salesforce is offering as far as their CMMC CRM. So
yeah, we're a big Salesforce is used by an awful lot of people. It's pretty much used by everybody in the defense industrial base, right? I don't know if all 60,000 are using it, but I would say we're probably around the 30,000.
Okay.
So it's important for you guys to know this.
Jim, Jason, I'm not sure if this is answered in the chat, but I saw that someone asked the same question. If someone is in a regular commercial space and needs to migrate over to the GCC environment, how does the data move, or is that a separate cost, or is it just a question of buying licenses and Salesforce takes care of it?
The latter.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So it basically replatforms it for you. There's a checklist of things that you have to do just to make sure that the two orgs are that you're compatible. If you wrote custom code Apex, we have to scan that to make sure that there are no hard-coded URLs and stuff like that, because the URL for that org will change when you go to GovCloud. But the most difficult thing about the whole process is getting your hands on the SSP and the CRM. those should be publicly published, but they're not. So you have to go through kind of a background check to get it. It's like, even I had a hard time getting our own. That just doesn't seem helpful. You have to have a CUI org in order to create a CUI org.
Okay.
But other than that, the process is pretty straightforward.
Thank
Now,
you.
in regards to the pricing for the licenses, guess can you talk to any about the pricing differences, or how much is the licenses?
I'm not really qualified. I'm an internal BT person.
Okay.
But I can share what's publicly known, and that is the compliance costs are pretty significant. One way of dealing with that is that the price of the licenses, as far as I know, are not that different. But the service is a lot different because we're using a lot more US-based resources and other things like that. So we're incurring costs, additional monitoring, all that kind of stuff. So we're incurring costs. So I think we're getting some of those costs back from the GovCloud pricing, and people aren't happy about that. But government's not paying for it. So there you go.
Understood. All right now.
But I don't think we're making a whole lot more margin on that. We're not milking anybody as far as I know. Right. So, it's just more expensive products and cost a little bit.
Good. Just did a quick search. Here we go. As far as, just double check, just seeing if y'all had a landing page for the CMMC. Looks like there is.
There's a white paper.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the chat.
You can get that. Again, that white paper, just to get that, you need clearance. But I can get that white paper's out on the internet. If you need that, if you want the white paper, I'll share that.
Okay, yeah, and I just put the link in the chat. And as far as for CPN, next month we'll be launching our training pathways. So pretty much for all of the cloud service providers that we've partnered with up to this point, which is AWS Gov, Microsoft, GCC, High, Prevail, Google Workspace. Is that something you think Salesforce yourself would be interested in kind of piloting or doing some type of training pathway for any members who are interested in learning more about the Salesforce CMMC solution?
Well, either Salesforce will do it or I'll do it. So one way or the other, if that's what you'd like, sure.
Yeah, well, you're the primary contact I have now at Salesforce. I'll be reaching out.
I can't do it. There's nothing about anything I'm telling you there. And the CMMC rules are the CMMC rules.
All right. See, especially if any of the people who are attending today may be interested in doing that pathway, learning more about the Salesforce, kind of diving into more of you mentioned the solution handbooks, the user stories, kind of working.
Yeah, go through the list of kind of how we solution stuff, and there are options, right? The good news is that the bad news is if Salesforce does it, they are not going to talk about the other options available. If I do it, I'm not in sales.
Absolutely. You're a man. I guess if you could talk more about kind of the types of data that, I think you mentioned a little bit earlier in terms of the type of data that may be categorized as FCI or CUI when clients are putting that into the CRM solution. I guess if you can get some little more examples, because I know that's something that a lot of small businesses struggle with in terms of identifying what is FCI or CUI. So in the context of CRM data, what are some examples that you see or can share?
Okay. So normally these public sector orgs address a number of different areas. They're going to be CMMC. And so any information the government labels as FCI or CUI or using whatever that crazy doctrine is that we should know anyway, even if they don't label it. Some Christian doctrine or whatever that is.
Right.
So the way that manifests itself typically is we're engaging with an agency. And again, this is typical of anybody, right? You're engaging with an agency. There's a procurement on the books, and DFARS is going to require CMMC level 2 certification in order to fulfill that, right? Whether or not you're putting CUI in the org or you're not, you still have to get the certificate in order to meet that DFARS requirement, and ultimately the FARS requirements for universities and government labs and all that. You guys already know that. So you need it anyway, but the information we typically see in there has to do with linking the mission area to the customer, to the agency. right? So the rule of thumb is you can say Jim, you can say Jim Novakoff, and you can talk all about Jim Novakoff. You can talk all about cancer, but you can't talk about Jim Novakoff's cancer. That's private. So in the Salesforce org, we're doing, in some cases, some pre-work where we're talking about the CIA or NSA or any of those three-letter agencies, and that's okay. We can talk about the fact that they exist and what their address is and stuff like that. And who you're talking to there. Once they start talking about mission area, however, that is where we typically see folks drawing the line. So let's say you're talking to the CIA, that's great. You're talking about a field agent tracking system, well, that's okay. But you can't say that the CIA has implemented a field agent tracking system. So once you kind of get to that within the context of a procurement, we're going to consider that sensitive. And then often DIB members have contractual terms with these three-letter agencies that are above and beyond CMMC.
Okay.
Right? So, for example, CMMC doesn't say that you can't tell anybody that you're doing business with that entity, right? It doesn't say you just can't post CUI, and the name sales CIA is not in and of itself CUI. Sometimes there are bilateral relationships with customers where they've agreed that neither party will discuss that they're doing business with the other party. So that org might also need to be controlled in a way to address those contractual agreements as well. And that'll add to the CMMC requirements. So, depending on the nature of the company and who they're doing business with, it could just be literally the documents labeled CUI and FCI being uploaded into Salesforce, like an RFP, or it could be an entire relationship with a sensitive customer is kind of de facto CUI, even if it's not technically CUI by NARA. And that is why folks hire folks like us to make those calls, right? Because each company does things a tiny bit.
That's helpful. So essentially, they're connecting those dots between the agency and the more non-public information.
Exactly. And then the agency, with the fact that it's labeled FCI or CUI, obviously is a no-brainer. But there are other circumstances too where you don't want to have a public sharing model so everyone can see everything you're doing with that agency.
Yeah, I find that example helpful because, like Linda, typically, especially for our small business clients, we would advise them just not to put anything that's considered FCI or labeled CUI into their CRM. However, once you get into thinking about the notes that they're putting in about that agency and the clients and the work they're doing, as you mentioned, the mission, then that can quickly potentially rise to that level of FCI or CUI.
Yeah, certainly by the Christian doctrine, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think forgets the Salesforce, the company. We don't think we want that kind of visibility going on across our ecosystem generally, running afoul.
Understood. How does Salesforce do any awareness training or education for your current clients? Let's say they're in the commercial and they're maybe have public sector clients, as far as kind of educating them on what they can and can't really, should or shouldn't be posting or uploading into Salesforce?
Well, we'll leave that to the RPs and the CCAs. We can kind of share best practices like any of us, but Salesforce is not a RPO. Okay. As far as I know, I'm the only CCA in the entire company of 7,000 and change.
Impressive.
I kind of have liberty to talk about some things, but if you're not a CCA, if you don't have those certifications, you shouldn't be talking about that kind of stuff on behalf of the company that you're working for.
Right, understood. All right, open it back up for questions. What do y'all have for Jim? What's on your mind? Just looking back through my notes, if I have anything outstanding. Let's see. Talked about the migration. You talked about the pricing. Here we go. Okay, Jason. Oh, it's about to jump. Yeah, those are
the other thing I think we're seeing across the ecosystem, Derek and Natasha and Ingrid, is the security departments are addressing CMMC. And the security departments are very good. And their job is to try to prevent folks from hacking into systems. But CMMC is not that. CMMC is a regulatory regime where you're telling the government that you're doing certain things. The CMMC doesn't say you're required to do everything you can to prevent folks from hacking into your system. It says there are these 110 controls, and we're going to verify that you're doing all 110 of them in one manner or another.
Mhm.
And the security folks sometimes have a hard time wrapping their hands around that, right?
Right.
And saying, well, okay, but this doesn't necessarily prevent folks from hacking in. And we'll say, well, great, we have the security department to do that. This is something else. This is you representing it to the government that you're using security best practices.
Right.
And that's causing a lot of noise in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Folks are saying, well, everybody has all these different opinions on CMMC. Well, that's because security folks are weighing in on that, and they're very good. And honestly, I'm glad we have them. But they may not necessarily have a regulatory background where they have the context of addressing either CMMC or FedRAMP or IL or anything where that's really more regulatory in basis as compared to technical in basis.
Yeah. Know that cybersecurity and compliance, they're not the same thing.
Not necessarily. We need each other,
Right.
and we work together, but it's not necessarily the same thing.
Good point. And I guess as far as security people, compliance, they just have to understand, especially with small businesses where they don't have a blank check, they don't have unlimited budget. So they're struggling just to kind of get to the baseline and the best practices. So it's just that balancing act. And they have competing priorities. So that's one thing to keep in mind.
With the small companies, again, if you use the CMMC Happy Meal, it's not free, but you're in that $50,000 range, right? Because you're paying
Easily.
for Salesforce already or something like it. Upgrading to GovCloud there is not massive, right? If you're on Google Workspace anyway, which most of these smaller companies are, migrating over to their GovCloud, it's not massive. Maybe upgrading CrowdStrike or whatever you're using to secure your endpoints, right? And using Okta,
Mhm.
right? Because you use a FedRAMP Okta or FedRAMP SailPoint to address the AC controls and other stuff like that. I mean, that's not huge, right? Then you add your assessment cost. And to be real, a lot of small companies are going to bow out. Those one guy shops, the retired colonels from the military who are doing in their one shop, one man consulting, that won't exist in the DIB a year or two from now, right? Because they can't afford the $50,000.
Right. Yeah.
If you're a company and you've got 6 to 10 employees and you're spending a couple $100,000 already on IT expenses, meeting this is going to be viable if you stay with the Happy Meal. I don't know if I'm allowed to say Happy Meal in my writing, but I'm saying it. If you stay with your CMMC Happy Meal of Okta, CrowdStrike, Salesforce, and Workspace, it's manageable, right? It's in the sub $100,000 range, and as compared to defense contractors that are spending 20% of their entire IT spend, sometimes up to $30 million or more on CMMC expenses. I don't know why companies are spending that much, but they're choosing to. And if they want to spend more on security, you knock themselves out, right? But you don't need to do that in order just to pass your assessment. But for smaller companies, if you stick with the CMMC Happy Meal and the goal is really just to pass the assessment, it can be done reasonably, except for these very, very small shops that are simply no longer going to be in business. And, unfortunately, that's the reality of it. That's just the reality, despite what DoD is going to say. They made it too expensive, right? L2, L1 maybe, but L2 no. And L3, God help us. That's FedRAMP High, right? So, we're going to do FedRAMP High for a one-man shop.
It definitely becomes kind of cost prohibitive. And that's a discussion I have with the small businesses. Like, it's a business decision. Like, you have to determine, okay, do you have the margins? Does it make sense, financial sense for you to continue doing business with the DoD?
Well, we already know we know the answer, Derek. Unless you've got 6 employees and you've got a relatively healthy business, they can't afford it unless they want to reach into their own pocket.
Yeah. Indeed. Circumstances, dib is in. So we wrap up. Any outstanding questions, Ingrid or Natasha? Close out. I've learned a lot.
No questions for me. Yeah, same.
But again, if you want goodies, if you're running into Salesforce stuff and you need goodies, just reach out to me and I'll pass them to you.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks, Jim. So
Okay.
what I'll
Thank you.
do is, Jim, I'll be following up with you to see if, based on the interest from CPM members, anyone that wants to do that training pathway for Salesforce, then we certainly can put
I would
something
love
together.
to offer that. I don't
Okay.
know how much you're going to charge me, Derek, to do it, but
No, that's you volunteering to CPM.
if it's a volunteering thing, then I'm really happy to do it because
Awesome.
there are real problems with CMMC. There's no question about it, but it's the best thing we got going right now. And until somebody comes up with something better, I'm all in.
Sounds good.
You agree, huh, Ingrid?
Well, we got you on record. There's no turning back now.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Cool.
Yeah, no.
All right, Jen, well, I appreciate your time today. Thank you all for joining. And I'll be posting this recording sometime over the next week or so once I get it edited. But cool. Thanks, Jim. And looking forward to working with you on the Salesforce training pathway.
Super.
Thank you.
You on? Bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.